Good morning, everybody. I'm just sharing screen here and welcoming you all to the third Games Education Summit. It's a BGI event, but we wouldn't be here without our sponsors Unity, Unreal Engine and Grads in Games. Thank you so much for your support. So my name is Rick Gibson. I'm the Chief Executive of the BGI, and as you might expect, just a quick word about what the BGI is. So we're an educational charity for games culture. We're tackling recognition of the cultural value of games. We're looking at diversity and inclusivity in games, the sustainability of games companies, and access to games development skills for all. We run a number of different programs. One you might have heard of is our Future Learn course, a free course on how to start your career in video games, in which young developers and senior producers and recruiters talk about games career pathways, and that is a course that's designed for games students. We've had 7,500 people enroll, over 500 in the last week, and I think that's going to have something to do with Games Careers Week, which is the first festival of its kind with over 80 different organizations coming together to celebrate careers in games and also open the doors to all of our organizations to show that there are careers for everybody, from lots of different backgrounds to women, to LGBTQ+, to those from minority ethnic communities, to the neurodiverse and people with disability and those from disadvantaged backgrounds. Our careers are available to all, and I'm delighted to say that is going incredibly well. Now just a bit, but before we get into the meat of our sessions, I just wanted to do some housekeeping. We will be running a few polls today, especially around our workshops, so keep an eye out for those. If you have Q&A, if you've got questions, we're going to be having Q&A for most of our sessions, not the keynotes, but for all of our panels. So please do chuck those into the Zoom chat and we'll follow those up. And if you're going to tweet, then please do use the hashtag. So we've got a fantastic range of talks over the next 2 days. The first day is on state of the art. So we're looking at some of the most cutting edge practice from both the games education angle, but also from recruitment and from organizations that are really breaking new ground to bridge that gap between education and games, the games sector. We've got one of the pioneers of in online education, Simon Nelson, who's going to be giving a keynote along with Unreal and Unity tomorrow. And tomorrow is our Pathways Day, where we will give a voice to the young people who are in the middle of their education or just started their games careers. And I think we've got a really exciting couple of days. But what we do have is a minister from the Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport, and I'm going to let her introduce.
I would like to congratulate the British Games Institute, Intergames and Grads in Games, including everyone involved, for the launch of the Games Careers Week. I'm so delighted this event is taking place to demonstrate professional career pathways and programme opportunities available in our fantastic games industry. Now, a career in games is certainly an exciting prospect. It is a unique sector where creativity and artistic talent meet digital expertise and cutting-edge innovation, all to produce the games so many of us enjoy playing. It's so important that we continue to inspire the UK's next generation of games makers. The UK's games industry has enjoyed really impressive growth over the years and looks to promise even more. This means an increasing demand for more artists, more designers and more programmers, a need for more ambitious, talented and critically diverse individuals to work alongside our world-leading games developers. It is vital that we encourage people from a diversity of backgrounds to really consider a role in video games. And I'm so pleased to see Games Careers Week included this as a key message. I firmly believe that everyone should have the opportunity to build a successful career in our amazing creative industries. Now, I'm sure you will all have a fantastic time learning about our brilliant game sector and the career opportunities available. and wish you all the very best for your future, whichever career path you choose. I would like to
Thank you very much to the Minister for that inspirational little video. I'm going to hand straight over to Mark Flanagan, the Education Partner Manager at Epic Games, who's going to give our first keynote. Over to you, Mark.
Hello, everybody, and thank you to all the organizations involved in getting this event working today, as it's one of the highlights of the year for many educators. And it's something which is a phenomenal opportunity for me to be able to reach you and discuss some of the things that we're doing, and also some of the things that we see in our work across not just the UK, but across the European and Middle Eastern African regions as well, which I'm also working in. The first thing which I'm going to address today, there's several topics and they're very much in line with what the overall conference will be talking about. But the first thing is generally where we are today in terms of COVID and how things are changing and how things have changed in terms of education. One of the major impacts we have seen is the actual extent of digital poverty across all students, across people. We had no idea we're actually struggling because they're coming into classes and accessing everything which they needed within universities. And that is something which we've seen everywhere in the United States, in Australia, across Europe, and in the UK. It's something which I think will need to be addressed in the future. Not just in terms of the access to decent broadband. And if I drop out today, it's because I'm having issues, but that will be resolved. But there are people who are struggling to be able to actually afford broadband. And the thought with a lot of people now is that access to broadband might actually be viewed as a utility rather than as just a luxury. And it's something which is a necessity for so many people in these situations. But moving forward, it is something which will be absolutely vital. Education is not going to change back to exactly the way it was before. I honestly believe that in the future, we're going to have at least some form of education which will be along the lines which we've been experimenting with, because necessity has been the mother of this invention. And we have actually learned some very, very valuable lessons along the way. I think that the access to internet is one thing. The access to digital devices is another thing, which is, it is difficult for people to afford, certainly with more than one member of the family needing access. It's something which we will try to address in some way, I'm sure, societally. But in terms of higher powered computing devices, which an awful lot of our students need, we have actually at Epic done some work with a company called Parsec to be able to have a mobile desktop. So what you can do is you can connect to the resources that are available within your establishment. That's something which I think, whether it's Parsec, whether it's other systems, and there are many others out there, that a lot of universities may actually want to keep up in the future, because having everybody coming in all the time to use resources it's good in one way, because we build a collegiate atmosphere, but also it's not necessary all the time. For instance, if people are working late at night, you don't necessarily want them working in your laboratory in a university. It is better if they're at home working safely and can get a decent night's rest and travel less. So these kind of things will certainly change. And we've also seen quite a switch in quite a lot of universities in terms of flipped learning. It has been quite a transition for some people to be able to use either pre-recorded videos. For instance, we supply quite a lot of pre-recorded videos to people, that everything we do is free, and that they can use this and give it as homework for people in the way that we used to be given a chapter to read. And then when they actually have time with students, we use that time to discuss what they've been doing, to discuss the problems they've had and how to actually address the issues which they have, rather than using their Zoom time to provide lectures, because it is very, very tiring on people to be Zooming all the time. And it's tiring for students as well. It's not something which is very easy to be able to sit through an hour's lecture, even 20 minutes is stretching it at times, and be able to retain information. So I think that's something which a lot of educators have either recorded their own videos or using pre-recorded videos from other people. And I think that is something which will continue to to be the case. When we're back in real world lecturing, that's something different, because we can mix things up, and we can go around, we can look at what people are doing in laboratories. It's a very different world. But for the online world and online delivery, I think that blended learning has come a long way in the past year or two. Excuse me, my voice is cracking up this time. Other things that have been addressed or are being addressed: the future of games. Games are not going anywhere in terms of downwards. They're going, if anywhere, upwards. And the uptake in games during this time of pandemic has actually been an incredibly valuable thing socially. A lot of times people have actually thanked me personally for the games that our company makes, because it has provided their children, and in some cases themselves, an opportunity to socialize and to actually do things which were very difficult for them to do otherwise. I think this leads us on to where Epic think that all of these technologies will converge, which is towards the metaverse, where it's not just games, it's the world of Ready Player One, or the metaverse from Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash, where we have entire virtual worlds where you can play games, where you can watch movies, drive around in cars, hang out with your friends, watch a concert, all of these kind of things. Which again leads me to an expansion of what games are doing. Games have done very well during this pandemic in terms of showing that they are socially necessary, and in a lot of cases they've actually thrived. But also we have seen the use of the real-time technologies, certainly from the Unreal perspective, grow at a rate which has been unprecedented. There are now Unreal Engine users in automotive, architecture, film and television, and simulation in fields that we wouldn't have previously thought of. Fashion shows are now being done virtually. And the use of these technologies has meant that there's more opportunities for people who have actually learned games technology. One of the questions that just occurred very early in the chat was in terms of age diversity. And I'm living proof of that, because I've actually worked through about 5 or 6 different careers at this point. I trained as an architect and got into architectural visualization, retrained in the Irish School of Animation, and came to the UK to work in the games industry. At that stage, I was not quite middle-aged, but I was oldish. It was back 2002. And I was accepted into the company then, because the games industry does tend to be quite welcoming of people who are passionate about what they're doing, no matter what their age. And I worked in that industry for a number of years in Codemasters, and then again in freestyle games, and moved to Australia with this. And then transitioned into education. And from education, discovered another career in visual effects, which is one of the industries which is now becoming most closely aligned with games technology. And I actually got my first job in visual effects after the age of 50. I know it's hard to believe, but I am actually over 50. So again, with these kind of careers, I think we're going to see this kind of age diversity growing, and diversity of all kinds is important in these companies. And again, there are other organizations like Access VFX, which are across games as well, that are very much keen on hearing different voices. But the games companies are also keen on this. The visual effects companies and the animation companies, we need different voices, we need different stories, we need different perspectives. And that's something which everybody can bring to us. Every person on this planet has a story to tell. And if we can enable them to do that through games technology, that's a really great way to grab hold of people's imagination and let them literally walk a mile in your shoes. So to let them experience what it's like, for example, as a refugee in a refugee camp, which friends of mine made a game many years ago called Escape from Woomera, which was funded by the Australian government. And it was showing what it was like being in a refugee camp in Australia. So it was using games technology and letting people experience new things. So we can do that, but we can also tell culturally significant stories across the world. On the realms of the new technologies and where they're going to, the amount of growth in salaries for people who know these kind of games technologies is well above what general growth in wages is across the world. In the UK, it's very, very significant. We actually have data on this, which we worked with the Burning Glass research people for, and that's available on our website if you want to have a look. It's an addendum to a report which we did for the American market a couple of years ago, and the addendum has an awful lot of information for the UK, which may be useful for you when you're looking at just explaining how important interactive industries are. So not just games, but interactive in general. Unreal are looking to make it better and easier for everybody to access all the technologies which they need to actually make these games and to tell these stories and to share their experiences. Recently, you may have seen our MetaHuman technology, which is going to be released in the very near future, which allows people to create characters in a way which would have been very, very difficult for all but the most skilled and experienced teams to do. In terms of environments, we just recently released a new plugin for Unreal that allows you basically to geolocate and use real-world open source data to create games. We also have things like the Quixel Megascans library. All of these are not intended to put anybody or any of the skills which you're teaching people out of work, but what they are intended to do is to help people who don't have those particular skill sets to be able to still be an auteur or a creator, and with one or two friends perhaps create something which is a large open world, something that's compelling, something that's not just a very small demo of a game, but something which is shippable. And if their idea is strong, that idea will survive and will thrive, we hope. So moving on from that, we have, obviously in the next year, we have a big release coming up, which is Unreal Engine 5. And just for those people who are asking when it'll be released when it's finished. And when it's safe for everybody to get access to it, there will be a pre-release version of that. And the other question which I get asked a lot, so I'm answering this before people ask the question, is should I wait for Unreal Engine 5 or should I start doing stuff in Unreal Engine 4? It's the same answer that I got given when I asked somebody, when should I join a gym? And they said, probably yesterday. But today is as good a day as any, because you start learning, you start building your skills, you start building your muscle, and it will only get better with that. The transition to Unreal Engine 5 won't be huge. Apart from this, I just think that everybody in education in games is doing a phenomenal job during these times. I think praise for everybody is really, really important. You probably don't hear it often enough. And I have heard a lot of students have struggled, and feedback from students has been difficult because students are frustrated and it's not the experience they wanted. I think the one challenge which, if we could address and make sure that this works for everybody, is I think a lot of students are missing that collegiate atmosphere. And if we can actually help them to build very strong online communities and communicate better together, I think that will make all of their experiences in education better. Because from my own experience teaching, the work that students do together is far more important than listening to the pearls of wisdom coming from either myself or much more clever people than me. So I'm going to leave you at that today. I'm not sure whether we want any questions from this, but I think I've touched on quite a few topics there, and I wait with bated breath to hear what everybody else has to say in all of their other panels today.
Thank you so much, Mark. You touched on loads of the subjects that we want to investigate over the next couple of days. So that's hugely appreciated. I'm going to welcome in our next session, and once I get the hang of screen share, there we go. We're going to move into our first panel. This is called The Great Debate, and it's where some of our leading games educators, leaders in games and recruitment, get to talk about the major challenges that they're currently facing. So I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourself. Let's start with Ian. Ian, I'm sure I saw you in there. Are you muted?
I am. I was just trying to unmute myself, just in true Zoom fashion. Yes, so my name's Ian Goodall, as it says up on the slide there. So I own Aardvark Swift, which is the specialist games recruitment agency. I also own a specialist games job board as well, which is Games Jobs Direct. And I also founded and run the not-for-profit now business, which is Grads in Games, which is, I suppose, or my sort of passion project that's turned into a not-for-profit business to try and help with these things like the Great Debate and everything games education related. So that's me.
Thanks, Ian. Charlotte, would you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, Rick. I'm Charlotte Pook. I am a talent acquisition specialist at Electric Square. We do have an initiative. We've got an initiative called Developing Minds, which is put in place to help students, and I'd love to obviously touch on that later in the chat. Thank you.
Brilliant. Welcome, Charlie, and well done for navigating your broadband problems this morning. Do you want to introduce yourself, Charlie?
Yes, would you like me to introduce myself there, Rick? Sorry,
Please do.
Yeah, so my apologies for any broadband issues that you may be having with my call this morning. I'm having connectivity issues here today. My name is Charlie Hargood. I'm a principal academic in games technology at Bournemouth University, where I conduct research particularly on game narrative. But I'm also obviously involved in both our games design and game software engineering courses here at Bournemouth.
Thanks, Charlie. Liz.
Hi, good morning. My name's Liz Prince. I run a specialist games recruitment business called Amicus. We've been in the industry for 21 years. I've been a recruiter for 27 years and a woman in games for 16 years. 2 years ago, I founded an initiative, a pro bono initiative called Putting the Gene to Gaming, where we focus on accelerating gender diversity in games.
Thanks, Liz, and welcome. Peter, would you introduce yourself?
Morning, everyone. Yeah, I'm Peter Howell. I'm a senior lecturer in game design at the University of Portsmouth, and the deputy course leader for the computer games technology programme. And I also run our advanced games research group as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so let's go into the first subject for discussion today, which is really a question for our educators. What impact has COVID had on games education, either the courses themselves and their delivery, or on the student body?
Shall I jump in on that one, Charlie?
Yeah, do you want to get started, Peter?
Shall I get us started? Yeah. Start with a positive, because I think that's probably a good place to start. It has certainly supercharged the kind of trajectory that was already there towards kind of embracing more blended approaches to delivery that would have otherwise taken probably a number of years through the standard kind of university machinery. And certainly some of that has had some really positive impacts on the type of skills that students are now getting the ability to kind of engage with around sort of remote working and managing teams remotely, dealing with various different forms of kind of version control and things like that. And some of those really should and probably will and should stick around after we kind of come out the other end of this whole process. And I think it's something that that Mark touched on around kind of communities and making sure that students feel part of a community. That's one of the key things that we've certainly focused on. I'm sure other universities have as well, is trying to balance that need for a student experience, because students are still expecting to get some of that surrounding university experience, even in an online capacity. So using things like Discord communities, making sure that there's far more kind of maybe online back and forth between not just between staff and students, but also between students and students. So we've got kind of like a peer-to-peer mentoring thing that runs through Discord, which has been quite popular, and just giving lots of opportunities for students to have these different types of interaction. And some of that will hopefully stick around as an alternative to face-to-face when we go back into the classroom as well. So I think that as a positive, that is certainly one impact that is worth noting.
Yeah, so I mean, just to, I guess, build on that, I think there's been a lot of impact, a lot of changes, obviously. Obviously, there's been changes to delivery, and some of that's been positive, as Peter says, right? In that we've explored more sort of blended approaches, and we've been using the technology in a range of different ways that compared to what we might have done before. There has been a discussion in academia about whether a hybrid delivery where possible or fully virtual delivery where possible is a good or a bad thing. Different universities have taken different approaches. At Bournemouth, we've gone fully virtual because for a range of reasons, and we think that has been for the best rather than sort of constantly back and forth as and when government regulations have allowed us to do a little bit of a physical. And I think I'm quite pleased with how that went. I was initially concerned, but it's gone quite well. There's also been obviously impact on assessments. We have to be aware of sort of social mobility questions with regards to access to computing. Some people might assume that all game students have a fully equipped gaming computer that can handle anything and everything, but it's not true, and it's not fair also to just say, well, you can't do your graphics coursework if you don't have a graphics computer. Okay, so we've come up with a virtual solution at Bournemouth whereby if students need to, they can connect to a virtual machine that has graphics cards and things to be able to enable that. But again, impact, something for us all to be aware of here. That is something for us to be thinking of. Yeah, I guess anything else that you'd add, Peter?
I think that's covered the main things. I think the equipment thing is really important because this is kind of in the wider context of education, because there's plenty of coverage in the media around like the access to equipment and the diverse, like the gap that's been kind of highlighted in certainly primary and secondary education. But that seems to kind of get forgotten when we talk about university students. There's maybe a bit of an implicit assumption that students that have gone to university, they are like well off to a certain degree, and that's just not, certainly at some universities, that's really not the case because of the environment that they're in. And those students have the exact same kind of access problems that school students and college students have, and that's worth noting, I think.
I think one other thing I'd add before, I'm sure Rick wants to move on to some other people other than just me and you, Peter. But yeah, just one other thing I'd add. I think a key issue for us to remember here as well is the impact on transferable skills. Just hearing the words of previous editions of GamesEd echoing in my head, okay, a lot of the time when we have this symposium every year, some of the key things that come from our wonderful colleagues in the games industry and associated organizations is the need for transferable skills in our games graduates, being good at communicating, good at working in groups, good at being able to take feedback and put together communications. Now, none of us are suggesting we stop teaching our students programming or creating wonderful 3D assets, but these transferable skills are really important, and they too have been impacted by the crisis. Now, on the more negative side, I suggest some of the things like the face-to-face communication, being able to do things like play testing and in-person UX evaluations. These are the sorts of key skills that have maybe been hampered by the crisis, okay? But again, to maybe finish on a positive side, to act as a sandwich to your positive start, Peter, we have been able to start training our students up in a lot of sort of virtual collaboration skills, okay? I think that the offices and the workplaces of the future are going to be inherently hybrid. We're not just going to pretend this year of crisis and working virtually didn't happen. And while we will get back to the office, there's going to be a hybrid aspect to it. And I think our students are going to have a lot more skills under their belt in terms of how to collaborate effectively virtually, how to use technology to help them do that.
Thank you. Well, I mean, you're touching on some of the subjects we're going to come back to many times over the next couple of days. Let's bring in our industry folk and ask about the impact of COVID on pathways into games careers. And I was going to ask Charlotte first to give the perspective from Electric Square.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'd echo Charlie's importance as to, briefing the students up on how best to interview over maybe a video call instead of face-to-face. I think that's such an important skill for the students to be learning because it is very different. And obviously in normal times, we'd have them in, we'd show them around and, get them an NDA and show them a little bit more behind the scenes. But unfortunately, due to the nature of this, it is harder. And I think those skills that you're teaching your students is massively valuable. I would say it, obviously in the current times, it has been more difficult with maybe your new grads and your interns to have those opportunities, mainly because, obviously we like to support them on site. So we have the best support possible. So if they have a problem, they can put their hand up and we'll be there in 2 seconds. However, it hasn't blocked us from, still receiving a lot of information from the students. I hope that they do still keep sending their CVs and covering letters to us, expressing their interest. We are still very much interested, and we will be taking on interns. Our partner, Keywords, I know is very keen to help with education and internships and obviously new graduate roles. So we would like to keep in line obviously with their vision as well. But our own vision is that too. Studio Gobo, our sister studio, has successfully taken on 2 interns over the last year. So it has been done and we have proved that we can do it. I do completely sympathise with the students that are hoping for obviously these graduate roles. It must be a very strange time for them indeed. But I would, urge them to keep being as passionate as they have been in previous years and sending that information to us because it will get through. We do also have Developing Minds, which I touched upon in my intro. It is an initiative we've put together as a studio to support the students. We have an amazing bunch of people in the studio who have come together and offered their services. So if any students want to reach out to us with any portfolio advice that they are seeking, we can review that for them. Any, art stations, it doesn't matter in what format you want to send us your details or your information. We'd love to help you. We'd love to review that for you. In the meantime, if you want to go into the summer really skilled up and ready to fire off those CVs and those portfolios, we would absolutely love to support in your growth. So please do reach out to us. We are a friendly bunch, I promise. And we will give you as much advice as we can.
Thanks, Charlotte. Let's go to our recruiters. Ian, what's your view from representing lots of different companies hiring? How's that changed over the last year?
Yeah, I don't think it's changed dramatically. I mean, we've got a dedicated graduate recruitment division, if you like, within the recruitment agency. So that's remained busy. It's remained busy with probably what we'd call our traditional graduate recruitment clients. So we've got a good number of studios that I think we've worked with for many years that sort of use if you like, the services of the grads in games and the aardvark team. That's remained particularly similar, I think, or quite strong. I think it's dropped slightly. I did ask for a quick heads up this week from our grad recruiter and just said, look, where are we at with the market at the moment? What's it looking like for this year? And her reaction was, well, not amazingly different, probably a little bit less, I think, than we would have seen this time last year in terms of just companies coming forward and saying, yes, we're going to want sort of lots of graduates, or if she seemed to suggest if they were looking for sort of 4 or 5 last year, it's probably going to be more like 2 or 3 this year, that kind of number. So we're probably looking at a slight drop across the board. But as Charlotte says, I mean, we found that we went into the pandemic last year right at the point where our graduate desk goes kaboom. It goes right at that point is when all the CVs are flying in. The graduates tend to leave it a little bit last minute before they start looking, unfortunately. So that's a real busy time for us, and we really feared that the studios would go into hiding on graduate recruitment, because it is that kind of, it's the more difficult onboarding side of things. I think definitely when you're onboarding someone who's never been onboarded into a business before ever, then inevitably studios could have taken that view of, well, let's just batten down the hatches and we'll wait till next year. But most of them didn't. Most of them barreled on, and I think that's remained fairly steady throughout. So it's pretty good. Yeah, it's not. It certainly could have been a lot worse. And I think as we come through it, hopefully things will continue to move forward.
Liz, what about from your perspective? Have you seen companies continue to hire all the way through the year?
Definitely. I think that along with all of us, as soon as March lockdown hit last year, we all kind of wondered how things would go. And I think the games industry was one of the fastest to pivot, to sort of change and adapt so just amazingly well from our perspective. I think something that Mark said earlier as well, the pandemic's definitely been the mother of innovation, hasn't it? And things have changed. And I think what he said, I totally agree with. I think there's going to be a lot of things that will stay alongside perhaps the older methods. I think some of the pathways, Rick, would have been closed without digital events. I know that one client ran a very specific event for the very first time because, you know, when we think about events like EGX or just any of those opportunities where the unis and the studios can get in front of students, face to face, it was like they were all gone. One of those events that ran for the first time reached more students than ever before. So there's no way that that is just going to disappear now overnight. I definitely totally agree that the candidate experience has changed hugely. Obviously, they can't see the studios, as Charlotte was saying, and onboarding definitely has changed. But again, because the studios have pivoted everything to the world of online, stand-ups are being done every single day in the same way as they used to be, but obviously virtually. And some of the feedback that we're getting is that some people who perhaps didn't have the confidence before the pandemic to sort of speak up a little bit more in those stand-ups are being encouraged because it's on video. And so there are some really positive things, actually. One of the things I was going to ask Peter and Charlie about the student experience was, again, some of the studios had talked about the fact that their pastoral care has been heightened through this experience. So some of the students that perhaps would have been a little more confident previously have absolutely run out of confidence. So the studios are having to do that kind of build up of confidence around them. Is that something that you've experienced at your side?
Absolutely, Liz. I mean, it's the pandemic and this crisis year has been difficult for everyone. I don't think anybody would say they've been having an absolutely fantastic time. And it's stressful for us and it's stressful for students. And this it's not just a case of, oh, I'm a bit busy and a bit stressed as well. This has actually caused some quite serious issues for some of our students. Many students have had a really difficult time. Now we have a well-being service at the university that's been working overtime and helping with it, but it has been really challenging. And we've tried to be patient and caring as well with our students. So that the university at certain times has put in place no detriment policies as well to really give students the time to go for that. But it also means in terms of our delivery, we're spending a lot more time taking care of students that are having a difficult time rather than just educating. And it is a difficult thing to work with, and it's something you have to be mindful of, particularly when you're asking students to do different things for assessment they may not be used to. They don't have necessarily the same bandwidth to adapt that they might used to. But also, given that Rick's talking about pathways into games careers, I think it's worth remembering that applying for games jobs is one of the more stressful things that a finishing student will do. The job application process is never easy. It's always a stressful time. You have to deal with rejection and lots of extra work and things. And several students who are at the end of their journey have told me that they're having a really hard time with that as well. So I think it's worth remembering that it's actually put a little bit of a crimp on the pathway into the industry as well.
Yeah, and I think that from today, and we have a panel later on as well with studios talking about the pathways into their studios over the last year. They are enormously positive about the opportunities that they're offering. So I really would want the educators in the room and the students to know that the games industry is 100% open for business for any of entry-level people. Because we've also, and I know we're possibly not even going to mention Brexit this morning, which is But the fact that we've now, we have cut off general access to the EU people that would generally potentially come into the industry, maybe at mid-level. So the importance to us now on sort of growing our own and nurturing our own talent is even more important than ever before.
I think one of the important things when we're talking about the sort of collision of both Brexit and the COVID crisis, yeah, we're going to talk about it now. You've done it.
Exit.
It's not necessarily just obviously that there are literal boundaries there that make it harder to go between the two, but in times of uncertainty, people are less likely in some ways to take risks, so they may not take the financial risks of changing country or doing something like that. But at the same time, particularly in academia, sometimes people sort of see academia as a bit of a sort of safe harbor to wait out the crisis inside of. So we've seen some impact there. Yeah, I think that. Yeah, there's a lot of tricky things there. Pete, would you like to add anything on the student experience side of things?
I think just what you've touched on there. Indeed, the speed at which kind of the games industry pivoted to continue working, I think that might have taken quite a lot of last year's graduates a little bit, not entirely by surprise, but a little bit more by surprise. We had a 60% increase in master's applications last year. And a lot of those students said that they're doing a master's because it's the safe option. And now I think a few of them maybe are thinking they could have just carried on applying, and they probably would have ended up with an industry role. So I think there's a little bit of a reflection there in the short term. And yeah, academia, for some baffling reason, does seem to be seen as this safe option. Not entirely sure why it's got that perspective. But yeah, no, nothing else particularly to add to what you said there already, Charlie.
One thing I would add as well is that it is worth remembering, although anecdotally, I have actually seen games jobs either stay the same or be slightly more available. I mean, Liz and Ian, you might be able to correct me because you've got the hard numbers on that, but it seems like it's stable or slightly increasing. But it is worth remembering that games students have lots of transferable skills, and they go into industries other than the games industry. Okay, it's not just a pathway to the games industry. And because of the slight depression on the economy, it has constrained jobs in other sectors that games students might go into, other technology areas that might not be doing as well as the games industry, or things like marketing and other creative digital industries that might be struggling in other ways. So although we can be collectively happy here and say, hooray, there's actually loads of games jobs, okay, game students are still maybe having a little bit of a pinch here in terms of those other options. And I wouldn't mind betting, Liz and Ian, if you see even more games graduates coming to your doors this year, because there are less opportunities elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think one good measure, certainly for us, is when we run the Search for a Star competition every year, and we look at how many students enter that from the different universities. I mean, you guys will have students that are coming from your unis, and we try and publish the kind of the results, if you like, and the sort of league table, if you want to call it that, to try and get a measure of how many students are coming forward. And it was the largest number this year that we've had entering the competitions across the art and the code and the animation struggle. Animation and VFX was a bit of a struggle, as it always is for us, but certainly from an art and a code point of view, then the numbers of students entering those competitions has not gone down. I think the appetite is still there. I think one of the things I did want to ask, actually, one thing that, I mean, Liz mentioned the online events, or the online delivery of events, which I think has been absolutely crucial. And we switched all our sort of face-to-face careers and portfolio events into an online delivery system. And we found that when we arranged the kind of the dedicated sessions with unis, where there was just sort of their students that were booked on, we got quite a decent uptake on those events, a lot bigger and a lot more turnout, shall we say, than the physical events, because we used to get probably around about 40% dropout. So we'd get 40% of people sign up to the physical event, the lecture theatre, but then not actually arrive. Whereas on the online events, we got a bigger number signing up, and then we'd also get a bigger number that would actually attend that event. The only place that we did really struggle though, and I wanted to get you guys sort of input on this in terms of whether you found the same, is that we opened up, and we've still got open now, a whole series of videos and advice videos on the Grads in Games website via the sort of Getting the Game journey. And we made that available for students as part of like a journey. And we sort of said, well, we published it and we've sent it out to students, sent it out to unis and said to students, come on this journey and you can learn about portfolios, you can learn about CVs, you can listen to people from industry. And we found the uptake on that, because it was sort of voluntary, was quite low, and we were quite surprised that there wasn't an appetite. And I just wondered, from you guys' point of view, when you've switched to online delivery of stuff, what's it been like? Has it been hard to get them engaged? Has it been easy, or how's it gone?
So that surprises me a little bit, Ian. So one of the universal truths I seem to have noticed as a shift to virtual is that your attendance goes up, but your engagement goes down. Okay, so I have many more people attending sessions, but the sort of back and forth that we get, the sort of the rich engagement tends to be a little bit depressed. Okay, so that's something I've noticed amongst students, but also I've run a number of virtual academic conferences this year, research conferences, and the same is true there. Our attendance has gone up, but unless you design it properly, your engagement will go down. I mean, there are some tips and tricks you can do there, but yeah, that's an aside. But in terms of like sort of extra visual materials, I'm interested to hear that from you, Ian. One, because I pointed all of my students at your website the other day, okay, but also two, because we've actually seen requests for those sorts of materials and those sorts of things to be available go up. So yeah, I'm kind of flummoxed. Yeah. But, I mean, Peter, what's your experience on that one, Ben?
Sort of similar. I mean, I kind of try and keep things a little bit more, I say blended between kind of delivered material and interactive material. But I think in terms of attendance, attendance has stayed fairly stable with what it would have been face-to-face. And engagement amongst those that have attended has actually been really quite good in terms of getting discussions going and things. So it's almost and kind of an inverse of what you've experienced. However, definitely when there is a virtual platform and material to work through, the just anecdotally looking at the engagement stats on some of my modules that are designed in a similar way, people that have clicked on things pretty high, people that have watched things past like the first few minutes pretty low. I don't know whether that says something about the material or my ability to deliver it, but certainly that would be my anecdotal experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky thing. Students are certainly getting used to the idea of video stuff. I mean, there is also a question on that, right? I mean, there's a whole debate in higher education at the moment about whether offering lots of video materials is a virtue or a sin, right? Because if you offer lots of virtual materials, you might disincentivize them turning up to live sessions where the engagement might be more valuable for them. I'm not saying that one way or the other is necessarily right or wrong, but it's not as simple as just give them all the videos. Yeah, I mean, certainly, again, anecdotally, I haven't done a full survey of the entire student body, but my impression has been that there's been a hunger for more resources like this. Yeah, I mean, but certainly one of the benefits of virtual platforms and meetings like this is obviously you don't have to walk to a location. I didn't have to get on a train to Sheffield today. So that Sadly. Is going to, indeed, yes, swings and roundabouts there, right? That does help engagement. And some events I've seen, I mean, there was one in particular, like last year, Narrowscope, which is like one of the game narrative events, saw almost like double the attendees that it would have done normally, right? It's that's impressive.
So we're going to have one or two more questions for the panel, and then definitely want to open up to Q&A from the delegates. So please use the chat channel to post any questions in there, and we'll be coming through to those in a few minutes. I wanted to move on to the topic of diversity, which we've covered at various different stages, and I guess my question is that over the last couple of years we've seen a real what I think is a sea change in the way that games companies in particular have been talking about diversity and the need to be more inclusive. And we've had a variety of pledges, and I guess that the question really is, as the rising awareness of diversity, has that actually changed how your organizations function, how they reach out to potential candidates, whether to be students or to start careers? What's actually changed in the way that that organizations operate? And if I can kind of start with our educators, how has that changed the way that you work? Maybe Peter.
Yeah, so I think in terms of recruitment, in terms of awareness of diversity, I don't think anything has significantly changed, like just on a surface level. Like we've always been kind of driving to enhance diversity, inclusivity, right across the spectrum. But what I think has certainly changed in terms of the way that the entire student and staff body operates, which will feed through definitely into attitudes taken forward into the workplace, is much more awareness amongst students, but also amongst staff as well, but particularly amongst students, of mental health, well-being, neurodiversity, because a lot of those things have been brought to the fore by the types of communication that people are having to engage in this year. And certainly in terms of group work, for example, where normally I might be dealing with groups that have all the normal problems of group working, particularly as a group of students, but where students might otherwise be kind of like, oh, so-and-so isn't doing this, they're not engaging with the group, and that's a bad thing. Can you hit them with a stick, please? Now it's more like, I don't really want to assume that they're just being lazy. How can I deal with this in a more professional way? And I've had some really good conversations with individual students and whole groups around kind of managing all of these various different challenges that people are having. And it's really kind of allowed us in lectures as well to focus on some of those kind of emotional intelligence skills, which will only be beneficial when those students move through into the workplace as well. So I think that is one thing around kind of like the whole functionality of the student experience, and indeed the staff interactions with students as well, that has changed, but not necessarily around recruitment per se.
Okay, Charlie, I mean, would you say there's a general uptick in diverse candidates putting themselves forward for to study with you, or more widely?
Yeah, I would. There is definitely so there is some easy things to say. Is there is definitely an understanding of the sea change. Okay, so both students and staff recognize that. There is definitely a will. There is an understanding. This is important. This matters. We need to push this forward. And in terms of diverse candidates, it's still not where I would like it to be at all, but it is creeping up. Okay, so the boat is pointing in the right direction. I think the challenge in higher education on this issue at the moment is to try and motivate some greater action, more than just will and small actions, but to actually sort of to level it up, to take it to the next level, where we're doing more than little things and more than, you know, trying to just encourage students, and actually doing some more substantial efforts to try and change this at a ground floor level, to really make it so that kids everywhere who might be going into education, going into jobs later on down the line, understand that games, both as an academic discipline and as a career, is frankly for more than white men. Okay, and that's that is where I think we're at. We understand it. There is a will. Good progress is being made, but it's slow, and we need to try and find a way to accelerate that.
Charlie, I wonder.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go on.
Just something like that that you mentioned previously, Charlie. Not today, but just the long-term action as well. It's not like it's a thing that we do and then we go, yes, we've ticked that box, and then we move on. It's a permanent action, which is a really kind of key point that you said previously. Sorry to jump in.
Absolutely, no, double tick to Pete there. He's remembered probably my most important point, which is that you need to do this more than just as a one-off. Oh, we want to encourage diversity, let's have a festival or an outreach thing. Okay, it needs to be something that all institutions, both HE and the industry, are doing year on year on year on year to really soak it into the population. And that's something you need to be able to do without expecting immediate impact and immediate return.
It's
Yeah.
not a project, right? It's yeah, it's not a one-off project. Rick, there was somebody who deals with board diversity of the FTSE 250 companies in the UK, and she had a program called the One and Done, which was boards in those companies who had one woman on the board and were like, got one, got it. Brilliant, I'm done. And she had a major project of calling all of them out, and it was called One and Done, because it's not just we've got one and therefore we're complete. Yeah, it's really interesting.
This is not a box ticking exercise, right? Yeah. We want to try and encourage a change across the board and have that really soak in. We're not just looking here to say, yeah, we've done this, now it's cool. Okay, that's not what it's about.
Ian, I sense you want to come in.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of, the only thing I was going to say is I think it lends itself very well to the conclusion that we've drawn, where we need to found, and which we have done, which is the Games Careers Week, which we're kind of part of as part of this, which means that hopefully everybody can get stuck in and do different things at different levels. And because I think it's tough for universities, you practically have got a very difficult problem in that there are some very chunky barriers that create diversity issues, I suppose, aren't there, which make it about, well, white males, really. We know why universities are sort of full of white males, and it's because they're probably the most advantaged in society and therefore rise to that level and go down that path, and etc. etc. So I certainly think, certainly from my point of view, in terms of how it's changed what we do, I think it's forced us to think. We do a load of good work at unis, and we do a load of good work at the sharp end, getting people more employable from universities, but we've dropped those efforts down to FE and down to apprenticeships and stuff, because I think it's that further down the chain that we need to make the differences. And then you guys will see, as long as you're open to the applications, which you are, there's no doubt about that. You want as many people as possible coming to the universities. But I think we're losing them further down the food chain, aren't we? And I think we all know that. That's something that certainly I have looked at with our grads in games efforts, is trying to work with the apprenticeship, trying to get them.
Charlotte, do come in, because I know you've been making great steps forward with several organisations you work for. Tell us how you've done it.
Yeah, so we obviously recognise, that like Charlie mentioned, there's a lot of work to be done in the industry, and it's not a one-off. Obviously, as Liz touched base on as well, and it is making sure that we are constantly getting involved with all of these amazing opportunities people are putting out there. There's such amazing initiatives that we are a part of, and I even have to write them down because there's so many that we're involved with, and it's an amazing thing that I have to do that. There's so many people out there creating such amazing resources. I mean, just to name a few of the people that we have been in contact with and in partnership with in the last year. So there was Code Coven, who are look after marginalised genders, and they are an amazing programming scheme that we helped them with a summer school, and we got to see this amazing creation right at the end of it, and I got to be a part of it and speak to these amazing people, the super talent. And then we got to obviously help with BAME Games, who have come up with this amazing mentorship program, and a lot of our staff are on board there as well, who want to support obviously the BAME community. Also, Into Games, recently we were able to supply 15 new laptops to children who were at home, obviously due to the lockdown. And as Charlie mentioned, it's something that I'd never thought about until this point, and it's something that I need to educate my own self and obviously my colleagues on, is people do assume that everyone can afford the equipment if they're doing a course. And it's really sad that it has been an assumption, and it's something that still is around, that people might not have those facilities. And these universities are amazing, coming up with these different ways of challenging that. And it's a thing that I think we need to obviously as an industry think about as well, if there's other ways we can help support in these areas. And also Interactive Futures recently put on an amazing event that we got to speak to, and that's airtime obviously to more students, and I know parents were out there as well, and I know that parents is another subject all in all forms, because it's convincing obviously people at that end of the spectrum that it's an amazing career for their children to go into as well. Also a Diversity and Ability, an amazing group of people that helped us revamp our actual recruitment process. So we looked at the way we were, our wording wording on our website, our wording on our applications, how easy and accessible our applications were. Could we provide that on different paper or a paper format if someone needed that? Could we interview off-site if it was a bit intimidating for someone and they felt that a different place was better? And just making it so much more accessible for everyone that they don't have to ask, it's already in place. It's a place that we want to be at, so that it's already there and they know about it before they've even had to ask the question. And obviously then unconscious bias training came alongside their initiative as an advice for us. We had that roll out across the board throughout the studio for anyone that was going to be involved with, I think it was everyone in the end, but everyone certainly who was involved with interview processes, where it is so crucial that they've had that training and they look at these CVs from a fresh mind and just look at the wording and make sure that we are supporting people that might fall down in a formal interview process. How can we word things better so it's not a scary formal interview, maybe more of a conversation? We're going to get more value from that. So it's about just kind of assessing us, educating us ourselves, putting that work in, making sure that we recognize things that are important to everyone from all walks of life, and that we can support them, which is how Developing Minds came out of, because we wanted to do our bit as a actual resource that we're putting out there from the Studio Electric Square. So I think, we're massively passionate. Our directors are on board, which is the main thing for me. It starts from the top, and then as soon as everyone's here, we all have that rollout throughout the whole of the studio, and it's definitely showing. I'm in a place where, yes, I would, alongside Charlie, would love to see more diversity in my studio, but I do also appreciate we have an amazing variety of diverse candidates applying, and I just, urge people to keep applying to us and keep contacting us, because we are here and we are a safe space to approach.
I'm so glad you mentioned the importance of the senior management, the directors of the company, directors of the studio, doing more than just letting somebody down the organization tick a box, but not change the culture. And I think there is something about a shift in the culture. Liz, you're nodding. I mean, I know, what's your perspective on how much change we've actually, how much progress have we actually made?
I think we're in, I suppose, like most industries, we've kind of got a three-tier feel across games. Those who are leading the way, absolutely. Those, I think, in the middle, who have the will, but not necessarily the skill or the resources. And then there are still companies who it's just not on their radar. Maybe they think it's people being a little bit woke and it's just not for me. Or in some cases, they just haven't got any headspace at all to prioritize it. Yeah. And that's where they are. But the bottom line is that candidates at entry level all the way through to experienced will start to vote with their feet. They will go to those organizations where they feel valued, comfortable, welcomed, etc. I think therefore it has to trickle down all the way through the industry. But I think that's where we are at the moment. The thing that I think is really clear from what Charlotte's just said is that diversifying teams takes effort, huge effort. And so that's when it comes to, I think, yes, do studios want to diversify? Mainly yes, but do they always have that sort of the skill set or the resources? Perhaps no. So reaching into these organizations and talking to people who can have that helpful resource for them is absolutely key.
Is it about creating change agents, about advocates, about diversity champions? Because I get the sense that if you've got a Charlotte in your organisation, who, I mean, forgive me, Charlotte, but you are an engine. You're making so many different things happen across the board, changing culture from kind of inside out. Do we need those agents, those advocates, those champions in our organisation?
Of course, definitely, but I'm sure Charlotte would say that without her C-suite being behind this or actually in front of this, then it can just be passed to HR and it becomes like an HR project or even sometimes a recruitment project. And the worst possible thing from my perspective is that if Charlotte was to recruit and find all those fantastic people and sell the dream, but actually the reality was that it wasn't an inclusive, great place to work, then immediately those individuals would start looking elsewhere, right? We had an example of this yesterday. It was a really senior person who had made a move somewhere on the dream of something, or being sold the dream of something. And her response to me was, it's a boys' club. I don't see that it's going to change. And she wasn't enough as one individual to make that change. It has to feel like you're moving towards something, as Charlotte's described at those studios, that it's a much bigger wave. Charlie said earlier, it's not something that's going to change tomorrow. It's an ongoing, every single day, everybody's responsibility to keep talking about diversity and making it one of the key board priorities of any organisation. Otherwise, it just doesn't have enough bandwidth to change.
Ian, I was going to pull you in because you had a really interesting few comments in the chat about getting to people young, and ever since GamesEd started, we've been talking about how the interventions that the games sector, games universities need to happen really early on in that pathway, so that parents and educators. You mentioned something about careers advisors in schools. Do you want to just unpack that for us?
Yeah, I think it's a really tough problem, is careers advice in schools, because it's generally very, very poor across the board, and that's not me kind of, I don't know, trying to slag anybody off or anything. I think the politics and the finances of it dictate that 10, 15, 20 years ago, there was a budget for careers advice, and it was delivered by external bodies, and it was done in schools, and that was it. It was kind of done because somebody was paid to do it. And then that finance was then given to schools directly, and inevitably that finance has ended up heading towards frontline teaching, because it's got to. I mean, they need pens and pencils and teachers rather than careers advice, I suppose. But so I think it's gradually got worse, and it was bad when I was at school. But I think the practical side of it is it's very difficult to expect any careers advisor or teachers to understand the games industry, the creative industry, the animation industry, the steel industry, the whatever, millions of industries out there. The world is such a fantastic sort of, I don't know, range of opportunities. But I think the games industry's probably got to do a bit better, or try to do a bit better, in terms of just explaining the basics of, if you are good at art, then you can be a games artist. If you are good at maths, you can be a programmer. If you're a logical kid, then you should be going and doing computer science. And I think those are the signposts that are missing, which you and I have talked about it, Rick. We know that we're trying to get things better, and there's a lot of people trying to get things better. But that's where we can really sort of impact diversity, is just by inspiring more kids to stick or go down those kind of paths, rather than the school's agenda being forced upon people, which is maths, English, science. You will do well in your exams, etc., etc. And that's their challenge. We know that's not for us to. We can't change what the government's forcing them to do. So it's.
I totally agree with that, but I do desperately think that there is, I think Charlotte mentioned it earlier, a huge parental agenda here that we need to get in front of. And there was a guy who's just started his own studio who he said to me, I was born in India. When I told my family that I was going to start a games company, he said they were ashamed. They were ashamed. And that societally, that's a huge problem, because if somebody is expected to go into a certain career because that is a societal expectation from their family, then to veer off that in any way, not just into games, is really difficult. So I said to him that from his perspective, he is a role model. And certainly some women I know in the games industry find it a little bit uncomfortable that they might be used as that kind of, I don't mean token, but put in front of to be represented, be the representative. But actually, this is where we are as an industry. So we have to put ourselves out there, and we have to represent, we have to be the role models until there are more of us, so that we can feel that little sort of more level of comfort.
It's a very familiar point from people of colour, and particularly from the South Asian community. I mean, Shahid Ahmed's on our advisory board. I mean, this is someone who's had a very successful career for over 30 years, worked for some of the biggest companies. And when he goes into his community, he will still have people telling him to get a proper job. Yeah. And Kish Hirani will talk about this as well. It is a real issue. I mean, we're in particular communities that have the 5 professions that are acceptable and nothing else is. And it's very, very hard to shift without those role models going in at the grassroots and giving those talks. I just want to bring in a comment from Rob Griffiths, who is saying in the chat, schools need to support this too. As an FE college mainly, we find it very difficult to diversify since most applicants are male. Schools need to encourage these careers to everyone. And I do, I mean, I totally take the point. I do wonder about that, because I think that has traditionally been the what industry says when they're challenged on diversity, and whether they're not quotas, but whether they're hitting anything that remotely represents the population, is that, oh, we don't see the candidates. But I think Liz, you're totally right. You've actually got to go out and proactively talk to those schools. Charlotte, you're nodding. I mean, I imagine you guys do. You're talking to lots of young people and parents.
Yeah, so it is something we would like to do more of. It is a conscious effort that we want to go forward and do more primary, junior chats, even and tailor that to whatever level that needs to be. We would also like to be speaking with more parents. So if things like Interactive Futures give us that opportunity where we have a platform to speak to parents, I think more events like that online would be fantastic to get more parents hearing what we have to say. If that's via their school, that's fine. If it's via another platform, that's also fine. But I think, yes, we definitely need to improve with the sort of the junior primary schools, and it is definitely something that I think our main focus has been at a university level for quite some time, and we have started speaking to some more junior primary schools recently, and that is an area we would love to build on. And as I think you're right, once you've got to university, you have the buy-in. I know it's something Charlie spoke about before. You have their buy-in, they've chosen their subject, they're at a point where they've gone through the application process and they've got their position. So it's getting them before they've even decided or know what's out there. We would love to be a part of that. And if there are any schools or any pupils listening or any parents, we would absolutely love to come and attend maybe more virtual events at the moment, or more physical events when we can, to inspire young people.
I think that there are a couple of things that could be done, because it's about doing it at scale as well, and it's very difficult for Charlotte and the gang down there to kind of change the world all on their own as one studio. And they're not the only ones doing it, let's be fair. There are many studios that are just as dedicated and doing stuff in the local area, so it's great. But there's a couple of things. One is the Enterprise Advisor Network, which is something that any studio should definitely get involved in, which is where you can put a member of your staff into local schools and colleges to work with their careers teachers. Every comp in that kind of region has an enterprise advisor, and every college has an enterprise advisor. So you get the chance, like I do, to drive the agenda of video games as much as I can. I'll talk to kids about anything and everything to inspire them, but anytime I get a chance, it's kind of, well, what about games? What about games? And you just get to change a few minds doing that. And the other thing is things like Code Club as well. I mean, Code Club that Charlotte made, I think Charlotte mentioned earlier. Code Club, when I spoke to them a few years ago, I think they'd got zero Code Club representatives that were from the video games industry, which is again where you get the chance to set up a code club in a primary school to teach kids about coding, not about video games per se, but certainly about coding. And yet the engagement with video games industry professionals in that is pretty minimal. And I think it's a bit sad really, because I think the games industry, one thing I would think I have noticed over the last 12 months, 2 years, is that I think we have realized as an industry that we need to sort this out ourselves, because nobody else is going to come along and do it for us. So using the people that are out there, like Code Club, like the Careers Enterprise Advisor Network, they're all structures that are in place, but it does require now bodies. It requires people to give up their own time, give up their own efforts, and get out there and do it. Otherwise, it's not going to change.
So I'm just going to bring one comment in from one of our delegates, which I think is from Saif. Forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your name. Maybe just show them, we're talking about how to reach particular communities, maybe just show them what a senior salary is, because from my experience, people care about how much money the job will be giving rather than what the job is. And I definitely think, I mean, as a parent, when thinking about my kids' future careers, I mean, they're quite young, I want to be reassured that they're going to have not just a working wage, but a chance to succeed. And so, I mean, that's one of the things that we're doing during Games Careers Week, which very much echoing what Ian has been saying, is actually talking about to parents about the economics of an industry where starting salaries are well over 20% above the national average, and where senior salaries are way above national average. So that's definitely something that we do. Now, we're out of time for our first session. There's so much to discuss, but thankfully we've got 2 days to do it and lots of different sessions. So I'd like to thank our panelists for a really exciting introduction to the summit. And I'm going to welcome you back to our next session, which starts in 10 minutes time. And we're going to look at strategies for educating in a post-COVID world, and led by Dr. Jake Habgood. So see everybody in 10 minutes. Thank you.